Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Administration and Finance Committee meeting on November the 7th. I will now call on Will Short, Regional Clerk, to conduct the roll call.
Thank you, Chair Harris. Chair Redmond. Chair Redmond's here. Councillor Craig. Councillor Deutschmann. Councillor Deutschmann. No. Councillor Erb.
He is here.
Yeah. Councillor Foxton.
Present.
Chair Harris.
Here.
Councillor Hunig.
Still here.
Councillor James.
Present.
Councillor Liggett. Councillor McCabe. Councillor Nowak. Councillor Solonen.
Present.
Councillor Shantz.
Here.
Councillor Verbanovic. Councillor Williams. And Councillor Wolf.
Here.
Thank you, Chair.
Great. I would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gathered today is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We acknowledge the enduring presence of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today, their achievements, and their contributions to our community. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Councillor James.
Okay, so I need to declare an indirect pecuniary interest on item 7.1.1 of today's agenda because the applicant before council, the Clay and Glass Gallery, is currently one of my clients.
Okay, I didn't hear that, but okay, thank you, Councillor James. Seeing there are no presentations, we have no delegations. Council colleagues, if you wish to remove an item from the consent agenda, please indicate so now. We will obviously not take questions on those items unless items are requested to be moved to the regular agenda. Do we have a mover and a seconder to approve the consent agenda reports? Councillor Erb, seconded by Councillor Foxton. Please use the yes or no. I'm not in the finance. I did. I'm yes. And that is carried, folks. Item 7, the regular agenda, equitable services and opportunities. The report, regional operating support for public art galleries. I'll call on Rod Regier, Commissioner of Planning, Development and Legislative Services, to speak to the report. Rod.
Thank you, Chair Harris. Just a very brief introduction. The report addresses the issue of the Region of Waterloo providing operating funding for public art galleries. It provides the context on the historical decision in June of 2000 by Regional Council that deemed public art galleries a municipal responsibility, resulting in these galleries not receiving operating funds from the region for the past 23 years. And highlights the role of public art galleries in the region's cultural landscape. The report also outlines the financial implications and presents 2 budget options if public art galleries will become eligible to receive operating funding from the region. Staff are also recommend that eligibility criteria should be addressed through individual grant program guidelines, which are periodically reviewed in line with regional grant administration policy. So those are my comments, Chair Harris.
Okay, I believe there is an item for the committee to provide direction to staff. The clerks will have some potential motions that can be put up on the screen. Oh, I'm sorry, we've got a couple questions. Chair Redmond.
I was actually prepared to move one of the options as a motion.
Excellent. Go ahead.
I would move that the Regional Municipality of Waterloo reinstate public art galleries or eligible organizations to receive operating support through council-approved grant programs effective January 1st, 2024, as outlined in the report dated today, November 7th, 2023.
We do have a second, Councillor McCabe. Thank you, Councillor McCabe. So we'll put that up. Questions or discussion? If you could put that up one more time, I'll just read it.
Chair Harris, what's the other option?
To not fund.
Okay.
Councillor Foxton.
Is the other option to not fund? Because it says that the second option is, or that the Region of Waterloo add the ineligible public art grant galleries to grant program. So Oh, so it's based on eligibility. Thank you.
So let me read it just for folks so that there are really, we have a motion moved by Chair Redmond, seconded by Councilor McCabe, that the Regional Municipality of Waterloo reinstate public art galleries as eligible organizations to receive operating support through council-approved grant programs effective Jan 1, 2024, outlined in the report dated November 7th. Or there is a second recommendation or staff direction that the Regional Municipality of Waterloo add the ineligibility of public art galleries to grant program guidelines as outlined in the report. So we have the first one that was moved and seconded. Any other discussion on this this motion?
Yeah.
Otherwise, we will go to a vote. If we can pull up eScribe for that particular recommendation.
Didn't you get mine? I thought I did mine. But I voted. Why didn't it show up?
Didn't count.
Well, I voted.
It's carried, folks. Moving on to item 7.2, strategic priority, resilient.
Councillor Harris, I had was trying to speak, and I don't know, it didn't record. I just have a question. So the envelope for funding remains the same, and we're adding 3 more requests to it. Or is that correct?
Yes, through the chair, the decision today was simply a question of eligibility. The decision around the funding envelope will be discussed at the November 29th budget, strategic planning and budget committee meeting. And at that point, council can determine its desired funding envelope for all of the grant streams, and that'll be subject to final approval on the 13th of December.
Thank you. But the information we've had to date in our budget meeting showed that the amount from last year of, I forget what it was, 300 and some thousand, correct?
Yes, through the chair, for the purposes of the preliminary budget, we retained, generally speaking, we retained the same budget figure as last year. I think there's a couple of maybe minor differences there, but we'll bring forward all that information for for committee's consideration on the 29th.
Okay.
Thank you. 7.2, strategic priority, resilient and future-ready organization, plan and financial update. I'll call on Connie McDonald, Chief Communications and Strategy Officer, as well as our CFO, Craig Dyer, to speak to the report.
Thank you, and through the chair. Over the past 4 years, the region has been working with community partners on the 6 focus areas of the 2019 to 2023 strategic plan. This report serves as a final update to that plan, as our quarterly reporting will now transition to the newly approved 2023 to 27 strategic plan, Growing with Care. Overall, the organization has performed well during the 3rd quarter of 2023, and the majority of our key initiatives are on track or facing manageable deviation from the plan. Together, these efforts signify the strong finish that we've collectively achieved through the previous strategic plan, which has certainly set the stage for our continued growth and to build upon these accomplishments through the new plan. I'd like to share just a few highlights. Again, I always like to say I'm the one that gets to share all the good news in one, but this is certainly the collective efforts of all of my colleagues and all of the staff at the region and through our many partners in the community. So GRT currently experiencing higher ridership than ever before, celebrating a new milestone. The team is moving to expand services to meet the needs of the rapidly growing community, to help us move closer toward our regional goal of reducing our greenhouse gases by 80% by 2050. They've also commenced the development of the new integrated mobility plan. The plan will serve as a guide for sustainable growth of transportation networks and promote active modes of transportation. To address systemic barriers to childcare, the Childcare Subsidy Access Pilot launched in August 2023 and will see 11 childcare centres reserving 20 to 30% of spaces for children who are receiving childcare fee subsidy. In public health, the neighborhood nursing team and neighborhood bus have focused on community engagement with Indigenous, African, Caribbean, and Black identifying communities and have expanded service provision in culturally safe locations. From June to August, this team collectively delivered service to 126 neighborhoods and assisted over 1,300 clients across the region, and they also provided nearly 1,000 doses of childhood vaccines as part of that service. These are just a few small accomplishments. The full list is in your package. These achievements were made possible, obviously, through the dedication of our employees who provide services directly and those who support our infrastructure that's critical to serving our community as well. Again, this quarter, our most significant risk continues to be recruitment and retention of staff in a very competitive employment market. I'll turn it over to Mr. Dyer to speak to the financials.
Excuse me. Thank you, Connie. Based on the financial results through the first 3 quarters of 2023, the region is projecting a surplus in the range of $3.5 to $4 million. It's about 0.8% of the overall property tax levy for regional services. This is a slight improvement from the most recent, from the previous report based on mid-year results. And that improvement is mostly attributable to an increase in public transit fare revenue. I think you've received updates from my colleague Commissioner Getzky with respect to the additional ridership that we've been experiencing since September, and that has translated into additional fare revenue, which is now also reflected in increased estimates for 2024. Our current estimates also project minor surpluses in both water and wastewater of about $1 million and $2.3 million respectively, primarily driven by increased flows and the related revenue. And then finally, the region's capital program continues to progress with, we have many projects underway, currently estimating that expenditures will be in the range of about 68% of the overall budget, and will provide a final report in the early part of 2024 based on our year-end results, which we'll use for the purposes of our financial statements. Thank you.
Thank you. This item is for information, but happy to entertain any questions. Seeing none, I will ask Mr. Dyer to chime back in on our next agenda item, 722, the Waterloo Region Police Service Operating Surplus. Mr. Dyer.
No, but thank you. Sure.
Yes, thank you to the chair. The report before you is an information report with respect to the Waterloo Region Police Service Operating Surplus, and is designed to provide some background information to the motion that was made by Councillor Huenink with respect to the treatment of that surplus, and that motion is on your agenda for today. Just at a very high level, the current practice of the region is that any operating surplus within the police services operating budget is retained by the police, and that surplus is allocated on an as-required basis at year-end to police reserves in accordance with police board policy. We did a bit of a review of these practices across the province, and there's, I think it's fair to say, a range of approaches, which generally are split into the surplus remains with the police service, and in other cases, the surplus is returned to the municipality. I would suggest that this is generally because the legislation, both the Municipal Act and the Police Services Act, are silent on the treatment of police surpluses. And so different approaches have been adopted by different municipalities. Overall, the reserve balances for the police service at the end of 2022 were approximately $46 million, and this was comprised of items such as the development charge reserve fund for police, a small number of capital reserves, and some other reserves related to some of their longer-term liabilities. With that, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to answer any questions.
And we have a few. Councillor Huenick.
Chair Harris, is this an appropriate time to speak to the assumptions baked into the motion?
Well, I'd like you to address questions, particularly to Mr. Dyer's report here. We can get into, obviously, the next item on the agenda is the motion. So,
Okay, so far I have no questions. You can come back to me. Thank you.
okay, Councillor Deutschman.
Thank you, Chair Harris. To you, to Commissioner Dyer. So in this report, I don't see reference to the, I believe it's $7 million that's in the levy right now that's contributed to police services reserves. Is that, did I miss that in this report?
So through the chair, so the report focuses on the surplus, which was the topic of the motion from Councillor Huenick. Certainly within the police services budget, there is a provision for reserves, mostly for capital reserves, vehicles and buildings, which is primarily what is found in the police services capital program.
Right. And the surplus that we're talking about traditionally has gone towards reserves when there's a surplus in police services.
Yes, that's correct.
So did you happen to determine whether any of these other jurisdictions where the surplus was either provided to police services or retained by council, did they have in place a policy that provided funding through the levy to increase their respective reserves?
Well, through the chair, that wasn't a question that I was asked. It wasn't a question that I asked of my colleagues. I think it would be a reasonable speculation to say that in most cases, it's a very common practice for municipalities to set aside money in reserves on an annual basis for capital purposes.
Well, but I'm specifically asking if in the police budget, did you inquire? It's a simple question, whether you know, do they or don't they, in their police budget, have a specific levy for, like in this case, $7 million to go into reserves?
That was not a question that I asked, no.
So you don't know?
That was not a question that I asked.
Okay, so you're, okay, thank you.
I don't see any other questions. This was an item that's been received for information. I know we have a motion that will likely have some more discussion and debate. So with that, I'll move on to item 8. The council committee tracking list has been received for information. Other business, we do have a motion from Councillor Huenick that was referred to staff for more information, which has now been provided. Before I call on Councillor Huenick to speak to her motion, Councillor Williams, are you still willing to second the motion? Williams, sorry. She nodded, yes, okay. So moved by Councillor Huenick, seconded by Councillor Williams. I think the motion's been read. Councillor Huenick, if you'll I guess, open up your motion, I'll let you speak to it.
So, to my knowledge, the region retains all other surpluses from all other operating budgets in the form of reserves. In my view, requesting 50% of the surplus back was a reasonable compromise, and I think that if we do this, if we put the funding into the things listed in the motion, that it may actually relieve pressure on police services. And ultimately, that's another source of collaboration as well.
Councillor Huenick, I guess I'll afford you an opportunity to come back, but Councillor Deutschman.
Thank you, Chair Harris. Yeah, so with respect to surplus, traditionally, of course, police services had retained whatever surplus there was at the end of the year, and prior to 2017 or 2020, there wasn't a specific levy that was charged on the budget. So surpluses are, as we all know, something that no municipality can budget for. We have a zero-based budgeting process, or whatever you want to call it. And if there are surpluses at the end of the year or deficits, I mean, we treat them as they come. So one, you can't plan for a surplus. No one should be planning for a surplus. We're not allowed to do that. I mean, if we are planning for a surplus in one area of our operations, then we're going to have to either increase the levy on the community, or we find cuts in other areas of our operations. And so it's sort of trading one off against the other, which is inappropriate. We as council really are the only people that make the determination on property taxes. Police Service Board is not elected. They're appointed to that position. We're elected by the people of the region to be the taxing authority and make these decisions. The chief's letter on this issue, raised a number of points which I found to be personally incorrect. One, we're talking about surplus, which is extra money at the end of the year that hasn't been used by police services in their operations, which means we've paid for everything that they've needed as budgeted. And so it's certainly not defund to take the part of the surplus away. I think to call it imprudent, to call Councillor Hunick's motion is imprudent is not a good characterization, because actually we do need some certainty on what's happening with surpluses. Traditionally, we said, police, yes, you can use it. Now we have, as of 2020, we have an actual reserve fund and $7 million that's put in. So we should have some certainty regarding what happens with any surplus that could occur. And that's what Councillor Hunick's motion does. The chief suggested that it violated the Police Services Act. That wasn't correct. It doesn't violate the Police Services Act. And the chief suggested that we should come and talk. I mean, we've certainly had an open door to have a discussion on budget since February of 2023, when we passed the motion outlining how we wanted them to come and see us. And we're always open to have a conversation. And I think the biggest issue is destabilization. The chief suggested that it would destabilize operations. A $250 million operation that might not be able to keep all or part of a $500,000 surplus, for example. And I think that's really the crux of the issue. Do we really believe that not being able to keep all of your surplus is going to destabilize? And I would say, given that we have a reserve program in place, or they have a reserve program in place where they actually already levy $7 million towards reserve, any impact on or any effect to surpluses is not going to destabilize. So it has been significantly expanded. There is no issue with respect to that. I mean, they have $50 million in reserves now, so they have a healthy reserve. And as the report we just looked at from Councillor Dyer indicated, some municipalities keep the reserve, some do not. And I would question, my question then was, well, how many actually have a reserve program in place, which we do? So Councillor Hunick's, and Hamilton just recently passed a motion that said that council will make the final determination as to what happens with police surpluses. That just passed in the past month. So this is something we can deal with, and I think it's fair to deal with. And surpluses should be returned in some proportion back to the municipality so we can deal with those issues and those funds. And I thank Councillor Hunick for providing this motion to provide some clarity to the practice here at the region. And it should not be just an offhanded, loosey-goosey, we're not sure what's going to happen situation, but have some specific determination here. And police, at the end of the day, we are responsible for any shortfalls that occur with police funding, as per the Police Services Act. So there will never be a destabilization. There is not a defund that's occurring, and police are afforded all the services and funding for all the services that they require. So it is a very good collaborative approach, and this motion should not be seen as an attack or in any way disparaging the good work that our Waterloo Regional Police Services do to keep our community safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Deutschman. Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Harris. And I think it's really good that we're having this discussion. And I would hope that we're going to have this discussion with both the chief and with Kirsten Hand when they come to give our WRPS estimate to council to discuss. But I would have to tell you that using the surplus, even 50% of it, to fund something is probably not a good idea from the regional perspective. And I suspect that we will be having reserve fund expenditures as part of the conversation. We look at our own budget at the region. The treatment of surpluses, as Mr. Dyer has said, are all over the map, and part of that is also predicated on the fact that different police services deal with their capital costs in different ways. At WRPS, if we have a shortfall or a deficit in our capital program, debt is taken on by WRPS to pay for that. So there are different treatments of relationships between municipal councils and police service boards, and I would tell you that ours is very dynamic, very integrated. And when we look at the reserve funds that the police have and look at the policies that the police board has brought in since 2020, I would tell you that they are modeling themselves after the Waterloo region and also looking at being professional and at best practice. So that is why those things exist. And if you look at the projections, and I believe council got this in a memo earlier, there are two major reserve funds that will be in deficit in 1 or 2 years. So there's not a lot of money in there. And if it is in deficit, I think the question was asked of Kirsten Hand when she came, would the region pay that shortfall? And her answer was no, WRPS would fund it. So it is a complicated relationship. I would certainly give you that. There are many unfunded liabilities. The biggest one for most police boards is WSIB. The chief came in July to present an annual report. Staff have provided monthly updates to council, so it may not meet the standard of some expectations, and can we always do better? Of course, but there has been regularly a two-way flow of information to council since the last budget when council demonstrated that they wanted more information. So I guess that was all I wanted to say that I do find this motion problematic, and I will not be supporting it.
Thank you, Chair Redmond. Councillor Foxton.
Thank you, through the chair. E-Scribes kicked me out. I didn't know that I got kicked out of the key, too. A lot of good comments from everybody, and this is what a good debate is like. This is where everybody respectfully gives their opinion. Councillor Deutschman, if I may, just in one situation, I sit on a lot of budget committees, and surpluses usually are because something did not get done in that year, or because staffing fell out of, and so we didn't have to cover those wages for that year until the next year. But on average, that's the reason for surpluses. We usually do not have a surplus if we have met all the criteria within the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Foxton. Councillor Shantz.
Thank you. Just a couple of things. I can't support the motion for a few reasons, but one of the things that's really concerning me in the motion is that it talks about operating departments, and so I would ask probably Mr. Walsh if I could. Is Waterloo Police Services a department of the region?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So it depends what you mean by department in terms of they are not a they're not a department in the sense that Planning and Development Services would be a department. They are co-governed essentially with the Police Services Board, and they are subject to the Police Services Act, which is separate from what governs the rest of our workplace, the Employment Standards Act, the Municipal Act, and so forth. There, from a budgetary perspective, that's all spelled out fairly clearly in the Police Services Act and the Municipal Act. So we essentially work with them, but I wouldn't say they're a department in the same sense as every other department here at the region of Waterloo. Hopefully that answers the question.
Sure, thank you. The other thing I wanted to comment on was the reserves, and Mr. Dyer commented that 3 of the major reserves that the Police Services Board have are DCs, capital reserves, and long-term unfunded liabilities. And I think as a region, we deal with those very regularly. They're very important reserves. They serve a very important purpose. So the fact that the Police Services Board has reserves should not be a surprise to anyone, and that we need them. And they are a couple of them are actually going to be in a deficit position in a couple of years. So I can't support this motion. The budget at police services is done in a way that is thoughtful and considers the needs of the police. At the end of the year, we have a surplus or we don't, just as the region does. And last year we had a surplus. And so the use of those surplus dollars to offset future liabilities in the reserves is more than reasonable.
Councillor Craig.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. When you look at this, the one thing I don't want, and I've said it before, is I don't want us to get into a confrontation between police services and the regional council. And I think that's kind of the road we're heading to at this particular point. If we really want to be collaborative and work with Police Services Board, then I think we need to delay this motion or defer it until the chief comes in and we hear his explanation of how this may in fact impact the Police Services Board budget. The other aspect of all of this is the fact that, last year during the budget discussions of the regional budget, most of the time was spent talking about police. And we had all the ramifications from the delegations and commentary that I thought, and I have said, has been very damaging to the police community. And I don't want to go down that route anymore or any longer. And I think we have to be very careful about this. The regional budget is $1.3 billion. Police services is $330 million. Yet we spent last year a considerable amount of time on one aspect. The greatest impact on the taxpayer is the regional proportion, not the police services. And I think we got to keep that perspective. We also have to, if I may suggest, look at how the Police Services Board has dealt with their budget. It's come in lower last year than the regional, and it's coming in lower this year than the regional budget. So they've been very responsible, and I think acted in a manner that complements and good counselship in terms of putting a budget in place that is respectful and I think best answers the questions regarding the police and activities. So my concern is if we continue with this, this will lead to a confrontation if this gets passed today. And I don't want that to happen because it probably will get kicked up to a tribunal and we will be there on opposite sides. So I would ask respectfully that we wait on this motion till the police chief comes in and we try to deal with this in a constructive way.
So, Councillor Craig, I'm understanding you're moving a motion to defer?
Not at this point. I will. I want to hear from the other people that are coming back for their secondary comments.
Councillor James.
Thank you, through you, Chair Harris. I just want to say to my colleague and friend across the table, Councillor Hunick, I know the intention with this motion was to address challenges that this region is facing, challenges that we keep hearing from our community about how everyone is going to afford tax bills and all of the things that are impacting us. I think there needed to be clarification about the surplus as was looked into. It was silent. There was silence around the surplus, and I will state as well that there was external legal on my part when I first put my motion forward around this that clarified that there was the Police Act was silent. But I do want to just really remind council and those that are here that when we are challenging systems or processes, remembering that the outcomes are central to community. And I know, Councillor Craig, you say there may be, may come to a head and all of that. I think that's part of the role of why we are here. and that shouldn't be taken as a form of resistance, but how are we collectively moving forward? So, with this motion, Councillor Hunick, I will support this motion because I know where your intention was with this. I don't know if it will pass, but I see you, I hear you, and I respect you for what you have done. Thank you.
Okay, we have a second round of speakers. Now, be cognizant, folks. I've given you your 5 minutes. We can go around in circles on the debate, so I'm going to preface that. But Councillor Deutschmann.
Thank you, Chair Harris. First off, I just need some clarification from Mr. Walsh, and it's with respect to the Police Services Act and municipals' role in terms of funding police services. Regardless of any unfunded liabilities or what have you, isn't it a fact that the region is responsible for all costs associated with policing, no matter what occurs?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So Section 39 is clear. Yes, that's true.
And 4 sub 3. Okay, so I just want to point that out. With respect to what Ms. Hand had to say, ultimately, whatever the deficit or debts of the police services is, it's the responsibility of us here around the Horseshoe. Again, I just wanted to say that no one plans for a surplus. And while a surplus was useful for police in terms of setting up reserves, such as for vehicle purchases in the past historically, we have a plan in place for police to make sure that they are covered off with the $7 million that comes from the levy. That's not speculative. A surplus is speculative. You may have a surplus one year, you may not. I think the KPMG report indicated that the average police surplus for a number of years was $2.5 to $3 million. But last year it was approximately $500,000. So you can't budget based on what a surplus will or won't be. However, they can budget on the $7 million they receive, and I think that is the prudent step. And that's where police services have taken the step to ensure that they have some consistency in budgeting, and that's a much better situation. And we're left now with this unplanned, uncertain surplus that arises from time to time. And all we're saying is that half of that surplus should come back to the region, since it is the taxpayers' dollars, and the other half then can go back to police for whatever purposes that they have. And with respect to Councillor Craig's comment about budget process, yes, there was a lot of time spent in the discussion of police, but we did indicate this time around that we wanted police to come to us sooner with their draft budget. And by having that discussion earlier, we wouldn't need to have a longer discussion another time. Just like we're having so many discussions about our own budget, we're only now going to have a one-day discussion of police budget when we should be having more days to discuss those. And I would like to see, if this is deferred, I would like to have the chief provide an opportunity, or chair of Police Services Board provide us with an opportunity to explain how not having access to those surpluses would destabilize operations. And that really is the crux of this situation. Let's hear what it is. Don't just say it. Let us understand what you mean by it. Thank you.
Councillor Hunick.
With regard to the possibility of deferring this motion for a second time so that we can hear from Chief Kroll as to the impact of this on WRPS, I'm curious as to why Chief Kroll isn't here today to explain that to us, because I think he could have come if he wanted to.
Councillor Craig. Yep.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up on these comments, that, we wanted the chief to come in on a budget that wasn't finalized, which indicated to me that some members of council wanted to look at the line by line and get into the particulars of the police budget. That's how I saw it. And I don't think that's the way that the Police Services Board wanted to do that. So we have the chief coming in on the 22nd. And Mr. McLean will be here, I understand. And I think from that perspective, we will get the other side of the story. But right now, if we approve this this motion, we really are going down the road towards a confrontation. And I don't want to see that happen. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So we have a motion on the table. So I don't have one to defer, so if there's no other speakers, we've got to move on a seconder. We are going to go to a vote if there's no other speakers. So clerk staff, if you can put that up on eScribe.
Sorry, point of order. Was Councillor Craig not moving
No,
a
I'm
deferral?
going to leave it stand.
No.
Okay, we're going to continue with the vote then, colleagues. So we are voting on the motion that's before us on the screen. It'll be up on your eScribe. I can read it. Whereas the region is facing yet another difficult budget year, and whereas housing, homelessness, drug addiction, and mental health services continue to need additional resources, and whereas all operating departments of the region do not retain any surplus that has been able to be achieved, and whereas the Waterloo Region Police Service in the recent years has been approved to transfer 100% of its surpluses to its own reserve funds, therefore be it resolved that any future surpluses be retained 50% to Waterloo Region Police Service reserve funds and 50% returned to the region. That is the motion we are voting on. Councillor Wolf? And that is defeated. Thank you, colleagues. Our next meeting is going to be December the 5th. I will now start a vote to adjourn the meeting, moved by Councillor Foxton, seconded by Councillor Salonen. Please use your yes or no button to vote.
I have another budget meeting. We're actually done for the day. We can go home now.
And that's carried. Colleagues, thanks for the great day.